Hello, and welcome to the 24-25 Accessibility Guidelines for the Lost Links Online Administration Training. This Lost Links Accessibility Guideline training is intended for school-level personnel and decision-making teams, particularly IEP teams, as they prepare for and implement the Lost Links. The Lost Links Accessibility Guidelines are also intended for assessment staff, PPT and Section 504 team members, and administrators who oversee the decisions that are made for instruction and assessment. These are the important dates for this year's administration of the Lost Links. The list of students enrolled in APSEPs based on the PSIS collection will be provided to ELACs on November 20th, 2024 for planning and communication purposes. Insight will be open for ELACs beginning December 9th. At this point, ELACs can begin entering accommodations manually for each student who has an approved accommodation. It's imperative that students who are eligible for the alternate assessments have a completed Connecticut alternate assessment system eligibility form in their finalized and implemented IEP within the CT-SEDS platform to ensure that they are rostered to the correct assessment, which would be the alternate assessment and not the Lost Links. If this is done beyond December 20th, 2024, then the student might be rostered incorrectly to the Lost Links. There's also a small group of students who may not be able to access a specific tested domain on the Lost Links due to a disability. For example, some English learners or multilingual learners may also have a primary disability category of deaf or hard of hearing and are unable to access the listening subtest of the Lost Links due to this disability. Similarly, some duly identified ELs, MLs may be nonverbal and due to their disability, even when provided assistive technology or augmentative and alternative communication supports, may not be able to participate in the speaking subtest. To communicate to the CSDE about these students, the ELAC will submit the student-specific information using the domain exemption form between November 12th and December 20th, 2024. If you submit the form after December 20th, you will also need to email Michael Sabatos at michael.sabatos@ct.gov. Accommodated paper forms must be received in time to test the students and return the materials, which is February 28th. That's before the end of the window to allow for time to process the paper forms and score them. In these next two slides, we've included some common abbreviations and acronyms for your reference. Collaboration between ELML educators, ELACs, special education teams, and Section 504 teams is key to determine if any kindergarten or newly arrived or enrolled students have been identified as ELML. These students will take the English Language Proficiency Assessment, Lost Links, or the Connecticut Alternate Assessment of English Language Proficiency, the CELP, in the winter of 2025. Educators should collaborate early within the school year to ensure the following: discuss and share any kindergarten or newly arrived or enrolled students have been identified as ELML. PPT or Section 504 team meetings should be planned once this designation is updated in PSIS and CT-SEDS to ensure correct designations and supports are in place prior to the testing window. Review ELP designations and accessibility supports and be sure that they are designated for the current grade level. Additionally, teams will need to consider the following when preparing for the ELP assessments. PPTs should determine which ELP assessment is most appropriate for that duly identified student. Teams can refer to the Determining Student Participation on Connecticut Statewide Summative Assessments flowchart that provides the planning and placement team with guidance on statewide assessment participation discussions and for the selection of accommodations applicable for each assessment system. Accessibility features and ELP assessment determination are within finalized and implemented plans prior to opening of the ELP assessment windows. As with newly identified and new students to your districts and schools, continued collaboration between ELML educators and special education and 504 teams is key. When preparing for loss links and accommodations, ELACs will want to ensure the following. Only ELs, MLs identified as special education or Section 504 students in PSIS will be eligible for accommodations. Your PSIS coordinator can provide rosters of these students. Other district personnel are also critical to the integration and successful testing of all Connecticut students. Specific individuals acting in the roles of ELAC, district administrator for testing, and the district special education director need to communicate regularly to establish a successful testing environment. It's important to note accommodations in IEPs or 504 plans must be based off the finalized and implemented IEP or Section 504 plan. If the accommodation is not listed in the IEP or 504 plan, it cannot be entered into the DRC Insight portal. If an accommodation is required, it must be added into the plan either through convening a meeting or amending the plan in CT SEDS per CSDE guidance. Additionally, only accommodations designated for the current grade level should be entered into the DRC Insight portal by the ELAC. Now we're going to look at the available universal tools and accommodations available for students on the loss links. LostLink's accessibility supports include universal tools and accommodations. Universal tools are available for use by all students during the test and don't require any action by the ELAC in the portal to activate them. Accommodations are only available to students who the PBT or Section 504 team has determined a specific access need. Accommodations provided to a student during statewide testing should also be provided during classroom instruction and other assessments given throughout the school year. The accommodation must be documented for the current grade of enrollment within the finalized and implemented IEP or 504 plan and CT SEDS. Teams should be aware that some tools and accommodations are embedded, meaning that they are provided to the student through the online testing platform, and some are not embedded and must be provided to the student by the school. Test administrators and students are encouraged to access the online tools training practice test to become familiar with universal tools and the testing environment. Here are some general guiding questions for the PPT, the 504 team, and the ELML team when considering and determining accommodations for testing each student. Teams should be considering the level of application, automaticity, familiarity, and student usage and feeling around the tool or accommodation. Teams may want to answer these questions when considering assigning accommodations within a student's IEP or Section 504 plan. Once again, it's important to familiarize the student with the tools available in the online tools training practice test so they understand how to access and operate the tools within the testing platform. The CSDE does not dictate a specific process for districts to implement when determining accessibility features for use during classroom instruction and on statewide assessments. However, for the purposes of statewide testing, including the loss links, there are some considerations to support these decisions. We reviewed in the previous slide guiding questions educator teams might want to consider. Another consideration is evidence to support the specific need for tools and accommodations. Examples of evidence supporting the need for accommodations include present levels of performance, annual goals, supplementary aids and services, documented need for assistance technology, data collected from usage within instructional settings or trials, as well as communication modes or access support such as signing, use of assistive technology, read aloud, or scribe. This evidence is described within the IEP or Section 504 plan in CT SEDS. This documentation may be reviewed by the CSDE to ensure appropriate understanding and use. This loss links accessibility chart identifies a range of universal tools and accommodations available to students on the loss links assessment. On the left-hand side, you will see in the blue chart universal tools that are available to all students on the loss links assessment. These tools include both embedded and non-embedded tools. On the right-hand side of this chart, in the salmon color, you will see embedded and non-embedded accommodations available on the loss links assessment. Please note The top two accommodations have the corresponding documentation of evidence linked within this chart the team should complete prior to assigning these accommodations. Remember, accommodations are available to students who have a finalized and implemented IEP or Section 504 that has determined the need for these accessibility features. Now we will be talking about available universal tools in Lost Links. Here's a list of embedded universal tools available for all students who are taking the Lost Links assessment. These tools are on for all students and are not required to be recorded in the DRC Insight portal. ELACs and ELML educators can refer to the Lost Links Test Administration Manual, Appendix C, Accessibility Guidelines for the Lost Links Assessment for a full description of each of the universal tools available. Available non-embedded tools include breaks and separate setting. Breaks are provided by the test administrator to students while maintaining appropriate security protocols, while separate setting allows district staff to support students who are easily distracted or who may distract others in environments such as group testing with an alternate location for test administration. The separate setting may be in a different room that allows students to work individually or within a smaller group. A specific adult employed by the school and trained in a manner consistent with the Lost Links Test Administration Manual, including security procedures, may act as a test proctor or administrator for the student. Now that we've reviewed the universal tools available on the Lost Links, we will be discussing available accommodations for students who are identified as special education or Section 504. Accommodations are test administration procedures in presentation, response, and other areas that provide equitable access during the assessment for students with disabilities. Accommodations should not affect how scores are interpreted, but should allow students with disabilities the opportunity to demonstrate their aptitude and achievement in testing situations rather than reflect their impairments. It should be clear that accommodations do not change the test content. Changes in test administration or content are considered test modifications that impact the resulting test scores, so they cannot be interpreted in the same way as scores from the original test administered in the standard manner and therefore are not allowed. As mentioned earlier in this presentation, accommodations provided to a student during statewide testing should also be provided during classroom instruction and other assessments given throughout the school year. Although some accommodations may be appropriate for instructional use, they may not be appropriate for use on a standardized assessment. When determining who is eligible to receive accommodations, ELACs, PBTs, and Section 504 teams need to ensure the following. The grade K-12 student is identified as an ELML in either special education or Section 504 in PSIS and has a finalized and implemented IEP or Section 504 plan in CT sets. The need for any accommodation must be documented in the finalized and implemented IEP or the Section 504 plan for the current grade of enrollment and used regularly for instruction and assessment. Additionally, the student requires one or more of the allowable accommodations described in the Lost Links Test Administration Manual in Appendix C. ELACs need to be aware accommodations cannot be entered into Insight before the IEP or 504 plan is finalized and implemented, and that accommodations must be indicated for the current grade of enrollment within the plan. The alternate response option, or manipulating test materials accommodation, is provided to the student individually and includes, but is not limited to, adapted keyboards, large keyboards, sticky keys, mouse keys, filter keys, adapted mouse, touchscreen, head wand, and switches. Students with some physical disabilities, including both fine motor and gross motor skills, may need to use this accommodation to access the Lost Links. In some cases, the test administrator acts as a navigator within the test delivery system to move through the test or select tools based on the student's directions. ELACs record this accommodation in the DRC Insight portal as MTM. The guiding principle in scribing is to ensure that the student has access to and is able to respond to test content. These students may have significant processing or motor difficulties requiring a scribe for responses in instruction and assessment. Again, this accommodation is used per PPT at Section 504 decisions instead of speech to text due to the features of the DRC testing platform. The Human Signer Visual Supports Accommodation allows a qualified test administrator to sign or provide visual language support for the reading passages to a student who is deaf or hard of hearing with a print disability. For this accommodation, students are tested individually and, if necessary, a sign language interpreter may assist in test administration by providing directions and clarifying information. When recording this accommodation, ELACs record this accommodation in the DRC Insight portal as SL. Please note that if a student requires the Lost Links Human Signer Visual Support Accommodation, the ELAC should order a paper test form using the Lost Links Accommodated Paper Materials Order Form available on the Connecticut DRC Lost Links website. This will allow access to the transcription of the content in the listening test for signing. All domains must be administered using the paper form and returned to DRC for scoring by the established due date, which is February 28, 2025. Now we're going to discuss accommodations that require the ELAC to order materials. Like the accommodation of Human Signer, the following accommodations will require ordering of materials. ELACs need to order these materials in advance of the testing window as indicated on the important date slide that we discussed at the beginning of this presentation. The ELAC will order materials by completing the Lost Links Accommodated Paper Materials Order Form on the Connecticut DRC Lost Links website. The Lost Links Accommodated Paper Test Form is a paper fixed form test booklet that provides all content in a scannable paper form. It's used by students with IEPs or Section 504 plans documenting the required use of paper presentation and/or response options due to a disability. These students should be tested individually by a trained test administrator familiar with the student's accommodations. ELACs will record this accommodation in the DRC Insight portal as other. Please note if a student qualifies for the Lost Links Human Signer Visual Support as an accommodation, as we noted, the ELAC will need to order a paper test form to be able to access a transcript for the listening test. When using this accommodation, all 4 domains must be completed within the paper test. This accommodation is a UEB contracted fixed form paper test booklet that provides all content in Braille. It's typically used by students who have visual disabilities. These students should be tested individually by a trained test administrator familiar with the student's accommodations. Braille audio is for all subtests. The Lost Links Form E audio files Braille can be located in the DRC Insight portal in General Information, Documents, Assessment Resources. ELACs will need to record this accommodation in Box 12 of the Student Answer Book. Please note there's no need to remove students taking the Braille test from DRC-created test sessions in the DRC Insight portal. ELACs will record this accommodation in the DRC Insight portal as BR. Student responses are transcribed into the scannable paper form prior to returning for scoring. ELACs will record this accommodation in the DRC Insight portal as BR. Student responses are transcribed into the scannable paper form prior to returning for scoring. Note, when using this accommodation, all 4 domains must be completed in the Braille test booklet. All student responses must be transcribed into the scannable paper form prior to return for scoring. Once again, this accommodation must be ordered and returned by the ELAC per the CSDE guidelines outlined earlier in this presentation. This accommodation is an enlarged paper fixed form test booklet that provides all content in an enlarged 18-point or larger font size. It's typically used by students who have print disabilities. These students should be tested individually by a trained test administrator familiar with the student's accommodations. ELACs will record this accommodation in the DRC Insight portal as LP. And please note, when using this accommodation, all 4 domains must be completed in the large print booklet. All student responses must be transcribed into the scannable paper form prior to return for scoring. We will now discuss accommodations available on Lost Links to support access to text. There are a variety of reader options for students with various access needs. Lost Links text-to-speech accommodation for the reading domain, passages and item prompts, and writing domain, stimuli and item prompts. The Lost Links read aloud accommodation for the reading domain, passages and item prompts, and writing domain, stimuli and item prompts. Lost Links read aloud of directions and item prompts only accommodation for the reading domain and writing domain. It's recommended that teams begin by reviewing Lost Links reader options table to learn more about available accommodations and their specific requirements. Text-to-speech of the Lost Links reading domain, passages and items, and read aloud of the reading domain, passages and items are accommodations for students who cannot access print or text due to a significant visual or print disability. To determine eligibility, the PPT or Section 504 team should complete either the Lost Links decision guidelines for text-to-speech accommodation for the reading domain, passages and items, and writing domain, stimuli and items, or the Lost Links documented evidence for read-aloud accommodation for the reading domain, passages and items, and writing domain, stimuli and item prompts. The PPT and Section 504 team responses must show a preponderance of evidence based on the student's vision or print disability that confirms the text-to-speech or read aloud is used throughout the student's daily instruction to access instructional materials. Additionally, students that qualify for either of these accommodations are those who, in spite of intensive and extensive instruction and intervention in the science of reading or in Braille acquisition, are unable to access print materials without the provision of more extensive accommodations. For example, audiobooks, screen readers, text-to-speech, Bookshare, or other types of alternate educational materials. If there's evidence of a specific word reading disability that impacts their ability to decode or encode words in phonological processing, text-to-speech or read aloud might be an appropriate accessibility support used during instruction and on assessments. However, attributes of a specific word disability or dyslexia should be evidenced in the student's current evaluation results and programming. In the context of assessing reading comprehension on the statewide ELP assessments, text-to-speech or read aloud of the Lost Links reading domain, passages and items, should only be provided as an access point or tool to the text. Otherwise, the provision of this accommodation alters the constructs being measured, and reading comprehension becomes listening comprehension. As discussed in the previous slide, if a student meets the eligibility requirements for Lost Links text-to-speech, the student should be familiar with and utilize this accommodation throughout their instruction, and if applicable, other formative and summative assessments. When administering this accommodation, ELACs and educators should be aware of the following. The accommodation is recorded in Insight by the ELAC as text-to-speech. The passages and item prompts for the reading subtest are read to the student via embedded text-to-speech technology. The student receiving this accommodation will automatically be provided text-to-speech for the writing domain. Like the text-to-speech accommodations, PPTs and Section 504 teams should review the documents listed here prior to making a determination. A preponderance of evidence should exist to support the eligibility of a student in grades K through 12 for the Lost Links read aloud for the reading domain accommodation, passages, and items. If eligible, this is a non-embedded accommodation provided to the student by a human reader in a one-to-one test setting. The PPT or Section 504 team must agree that the student's accessibility needs cannot be met using the Lost Links text-to-speech accommodation for the reading domain. If this accommodation is determined by the PPT or Section 504 team, ELACs need to be aware that all text is read aloud in English, and the trained and qualified human reader needs to review the Lost Links read aloud accommodation for the reading domain guidelines and sign and submit the security and confidentiality agreement. Additionally, ELACs need to be aware that this accommodation, if selected, also applies to the writing domain, and the trained and qualified human reader will read aloud text in English to the student in that subtest. Lost Links read aloud of directions and item prompts only accommodation for the reading domain and writing domain. This accommodation is for students who do not have a documented print or visual disability that would qualify them for text-to-speech of the reading domain or read aloud of the reading domain. With this accommodation, a trained and qualified human reader reads the following for each domain. Please be aware that each domain has specific guidance. For the writing domain, the human reader reads all text aloud in English to the student, including student directions, items, and item response options. On the reading domain, only directions and item prompts are read aloud to the student in an individual test setting. They do not read the reading passages. Once again, with this accommodation, all test content is read aloud in English to the student. This must be administered in a one-to-one test setting by a trained and qualified human reader who follows the Lost Links read aloud accommodation for the reading domain guidelines and who has submitted and signed a security and confidentiality agreement. ELACs record this accommodation in the DRC Insight portal as RA. To enter accommodations, log in to the DRC Insight portal. From the My Applications menu, choose the Student Management application. This will redirect the page to the Student Management page. Although your students will already be loaded into the DRC Insight portal and placed into a test session by DRC, you will need to add accommodations manually for each student who has an approved accommodation. To find a student, use the fields provided on the top of the page or by generating a list by that student's district and school, and then scrolling through the generated list once you've pressed the Find Student button. Please note that the list of students provided is dependent upon which district and school they were assigned to upon setup in the system. Your students will be listed alphabetically in a continuous list with 100 students viewable at a time. To narrow your list, you can search by school or any of the fields listed on the screen, such as last name, first name, student ID, or grade. When you click on the Action button for the View Edit, the student profile for the student appears. Edit or add any additional data prior to clicking the Save button. When you've found your student, you can add an accommodation on the Accommodation tab. Make sure you follow the CSDE policies when entering student accommodations. Enter accommodations under the Form F column. Except for text-to-speech, selecting any of the listed accommodations does not modify how the online Lost Links test is delivered to the student. The text-to-speech accommodation is set at the student level. This means that if this is an accommodation that's selected, it'll be available for both reading and writing. If a student doesn't have an accommodation for the reading of reading passages, do not select text-to-speech and select read aloud instead. Please refer to the CSDE accommodation policies in the Lost Links Test Administration Manual in Appendix C. A small group of students with an IEP or Section 504 plan may be exempt from the listening or speaking domains due to the complexities of their disability. Domain exemptions are available on the listening and/or speaking subtests for the following students. Students who are identified as deaf or hard of hearing may not be able to participate in the listening subtest due to this disability. Students who are nonverbal and even when provided assistive technology or augmentative and alternate communication supports may not be able to participate in the speaking subtest. Please note the ELAC should collaborate with PBT and Section 504 teams to determine if a student requires the domain exemption and submit the domain exemption form between November 12th and December 20th, 2024. Some students are present in school during the testing window, but for any of number of reasons don't take the test. These students may or may not have disabilities. If a student reluctantly begins the test and then becomes impatient or frustrated, but does not disturb other students, the test examiner should encourage the student to continue the test. The student may resume testing at a later time or on a different day. The student may decide to attempt the test later in the same session. The student will receive a score based on the number of items completed. In those circumstances where the student becomes emotionally agitated or disruptive, they should be promptly removed from the class if being tested in a group. If the student is being tested individually, the student should be provided with a break. An attempt should be made to reassure the student and to continue testing. If, however, it's apparent that the student cannot continue, the test administrator may collect the student's test materials or pause the test and remove the student from the test setting for the time remaining in that particular test period. If the student does not finish testing but has attempted to respond to some items, the student will receive a score based on the number of items completed. Students with serious emotional or behavior concerns are often among the most difficult to test. Even with suitable support and accommodations and individual administration, students sometimes refuse to be tested or become agitated or disrupted to the point that testing these students isn't appropriate. If a student reaches that point, particularly if the environment becomes unsafe for the student or others, testing must be stopped. On the next slide, you'll see resources and tools to help support you and your team. We've provided a number of resources, all of which are hyperlinked here. Some are available on the Connecticut DRC Lost Links webpage, while others are available on the CSDE Lost Links page. DRC can be contacted using the Lost Links help desk phone number or email address. And here's the contact information for our team at the CSDE. We are always available to answer any of your questions.